Chapter 241 to 242. Tamari stood in the stands, watching her father and the strange foreign kunoichi trying to kill each other with such vicious brutality and ferocity, it caused her to shiver in barely restrained fright. She was 10 years old, and honestly, she envied Kankuro, who dully stood next to her, staring in awe and considerable frustration at the fight. Her brother was not yet trained to the degree he could follow what was happening in the arena with his eyes. He knew he was witnessing something monumentally grand, something incredible. And he also tried to see more of it, but he was unable to. And that, in Tamari's opinion, was quite fortunate. At least he wouldn't have a scare of his life. One cannot comprehend what one cannot see, after all. She, on the other hand, had sufficient training to be capable of following Chunin-level speeds. Her bastard of a father made sure it was beaten into her as her early birthday gift until her reaction speed improved. While she didn't catch everything going on in the arena, she at least could get the gist of the important details in between all the rapid blurs and gory, scary stuff. The bottom line was, Tamari, for the first time in her life, saw what the elite ninjas were like, and with it came a realization. She could at any time encounter such an opponent in the field once she graduated. No matter how slim the chances were, it was possible. Tamari quickly reevaluated her life values. I will have to step up my training. She decided deep down in her heart, unwilling to accept that the fight in front of her was making her a teensy bit excited because of how terrifying it was for her young mind. For a few seemingly unending minutes, Tamari watched as Pakura stabbed and slashed her father, getting crushed or squished in return in what seemed like some deadly dance of knives and golden dust. Pakura's hands often blurred, and before Tamari could comprehend what happened, she found a kunai deeply lodged in some lethal part of her father, only for Pakura's body to be violently dismantled by the golden dust a second later. As this continued, however, Tamari slowly started to see a small difference. It was only slight and barely noticeable, but it was there. Tamari leaned forward in interest and anticipation, for a second feeling bad that she found excitement in the fact her father would be run through with kunai, or that his opponent in the match to the death was slowly starting to get more effective in fighting him. That feeling quickly left when she remembered her childhood, though. Suddenly, Tamari's eyes widened, and her breath hitched as something that never before happened. The kunai of the green-haired woman slit Rasa's throat only for him to burst into golden dust that instantly tried to smoothen Pakura. Everybody in the stands rapidly started looking around, expecting the two combatants to pop up in a different place and the fight to continue, but this time was different. This time, Pakura dodged. As the tendrils of golden dust tried to encompass her lithe form, Pakura flipped herself to the side, blurring, dodging the quickly moving dust. Tamari blinked at the unpredictability of the action. Pakura didn't dodge even once, at least not visibly. The sheer shock of the action made Tamari blank out for a split of a second, only to notice her father's form a few tens of feet away with kunai handle deep in his forehead, its tip peeking out from the back of his head. For a moment, Tamari held her breath and clenched her fists. She half expected him to die. Pakura killed him 2 times in under 2 seconds. Surely he was not fast enough to evade that. Before the slight feeling of guilt and happiness could fully bloom in her chest, the form of her father dissolved into golden dust, and Tamari suddenly found herself trying to suppress the feeling of inadequacy and disappointment. Shaking herself from her feelings, she refocused back onto the fight. Her father and his opponent were yet again locked in close-quarter combat, exchanging blows with their kunais. Golden dust swirled, bashed, smashed, and ripped through the air only for the nimble and graceful form of Pakura to weave through the attacks while pressing her father with her masterful knife work. Tamari couldn't see all of the moves. To her, the kunais twirled, blurred, whizzed far too fast. She could, however, see that her father was really at a disadvantage when Pakura so easily deflected his kunai, completely bypassing his guard and snapping the arm, which not a slip second ago blocked into a vicious jab. Pakura's hand blurred, and Temari was again graced with the scene of her father having kunai run through his head from under his chin. Relaxing, Temari bit her lips. "Am I a bad person for not caring when I see my father's form like that?" she mused. At the start, it bothered her. Now her father supposedly died over 40 times in front of her since the start of this match. Sure, it was just clones made of golden dust, but to her, it seemed pretty real. No, he deserves it. For what he did to Gaara. Temari stubbornly decided, her eyes watering. Interesting fight. Wouldn't you agree, Temari? A hand landed on her shoulder as these words entered her ears, and Temari flinched as if she was stabbed. Snapping her head to the left, her shoulders sagged. "Chiyoba, don't scare me like that," she pouted, getting a small smile from the old, usually grumpy woman. Ignoring the small outrage in Temari's tone, Chiyo continued speaking in what Temari recognized as the old lady's teacher mode from the lessons Kankuro was getting. "Observe the fight closely, Temari. It will serve you well. Bye." It was then that Kankuro was about to open his mouth, most likely complain about not being able to decipher what was really going on in the battlefield, only to be smacked by Chiyo before he could speak, causing his mouth to snap shut while his cheeks pinked as he petulantly crossed his arms on his chest. Temari giggled at her brother's misfortune. "They are incredibly fast." "That they are, child. That they are. Your father was not chosen to be the KasiCair because of his ugly mug." Chiyo mirthfully chortled. "And yet this is more psychological battle rather than all-out slugfest, girl." Hearing that, Temari's eyes widened. "What?" she blurted out, making some people turn towards her with admonishing gazes, just as in the battlefield. Pakura's arms were torn from her torso in exchange for getting a kunai up Rasa's ass and then kicking it deeper for a good measure with a snap kick. Seeing that particular moment, Chiyo burst out laughing while Temari ducked her head in utterly mortifying embarrassment as she saw her father's eyes widen to humorous proportions when Pakura buggered him with pointy steel. Rasa dissolved into golden dust while Pakura changed to mud. Surprising many, she could do earth jutsu. "What do you mean psychological?" Temari asked, in a vain attempt to make the honorable elder next to her stop laughing at the humiliation her father suffered. Finally, managing to stop herself from laughing, Chiyo spoke. "They are barely using basics. Both of them are ninjutsu experts focused on their bloodline. And yet, all Pakura is using is her exceptional kunai jutsu and some rudimentary low-cost jutsus, while your father didn't use even one battlefield reshaping technique. Chakra-wise, they could keep this up all day as long as neither does any mistake." She shook her head. But father is using so much dust!" Temari exclaimed in disbelief, knowing her family's bloodline is very chakra-exhausting. "Simple techniques he mastered long ago, and while there are tons of golden dust on the battlefield, the amount of dust he actively manipulates in a single instance is really small. He simply switches to the dust closest to his opponent. It just looks as if he used a whole lot of it, but in reality, he is using minimum." No, they could go at it for an entire day like this, with neither of them exhausted. Rasa most likely regenerates chakra faster than he is losing it at this rate. The golden dust clone is simply that cheap for him with his degree of mastery over his bloodline. As for Pakura, well, Chiyo trailed off in a small discomfort. Noticing, Temari curiously tilted her head, not separating her gaze from the two fighters in the arena. "What about her?" "She is the only kunoichi mad and skilled enough to face members of the Seven Swordsmen of Mist only with 2 kunais." Chiyo shrugged. In her time, she was the pride of our village. What Yondaime Hokage was to Konoha, she was to us to a lesser degree. at least before your father apparently decided to off her," she added in distaste before muttering, "Serves the prick well." Hearing about the apparent skill of the agile kunoichi, Tamari's eyes excitedly lit up as she wondered if she could get so strong one day too. Seeing Tamari's reaction, Chio hummed in self-satisfaction as her eyes flickered from side to side all over the arena, watching the flurry of death delivered by Pakura. Chio was far too experienced to not notice the ever-so-slight measured increase in speed of Pakura, slowly increasing her speed from Jonin level to S rank in 20 minutes. Chio thought not. At least, not unintentionally. Pakura was playing with Rasa, measuring him. It wasn't even funny, really. Not when in some instances, Pakura's hands went from 0 to 100 in matters of a split second, redirecting her stabs and strikes with such a sudden increase of speed that even Chio barely saw it as more than a blur. The worst part was that Pakura masked it so well, Chio doubted even many of the Suna Jonins noticed what the green-haired woman was actually doing. After all, she only managed to catch it because of her expertise in puppetry, and having quick fingers alongside sudden, snappish movements of hands was a must in her chosen field. Then again, speed was only one factor, and the fight was far from decided. Not when neither of the ninjutsu experts used ninjutsu yet. Let's hope this talk will lessen Tamari's hard feelings if Pakura wins, Chio wistfully thought. Pakura softly clicked her heel on the sandy ground under her, channeling her chakra, and instantly, with a scorching hot white flash, the ground around her was instantly turned into a glassy area, preventing Rasa from mixing his golden dust with the sand on the ground and sneaking it near her. "I am growing tired of cutting you up." She crossed her hands under her chest in a condescending manner. "Are we finally going to fight seriously?" The second she said that, a massive 20-foot-tall wave of golden dust rose from the sands behind her in a blink of an eye, viciously lunging at her as if it was a hungry beast. Pakura turned her head, inwardly praising Rasa that he attacked from behind rather than head-on, as was seemingly the norm nowadays, and lifted her hand with her fingers ready for a snapping motion, aiming at the avalanche of golden dust. "So he used our little foreplay to substitute sands under the ground with his golden dust, leaving only a thin layer of sand on top of it as camouflage, huh?" Pakura thought as she snapped her fingers, sending a rapid wave of her special scorched chakra forward with incredible velocity. The tsunami of golden dust met a supersonic wave of scorching heat, briefly blinding the observers as white flash spread through the battlefield as fast as it disappeared, leaving only a massive semi-liquid lump of smelted gold of the size of the Hokage monument in Konoha behind that was quickly cooling off and hardening, making Rasa's chakra have a lot of trouble as he tried and failed to manipulate it. Pakura, still standing in the same spot, looked at the mountain of gold she helped to create, and a small smile appeared on her usually stoic face. The deed was a whole lot harder and impressive than it looked, to be honest. Too much heat and the gold would need more time to harden into a somewhat solid form, giving Rasa enough time to pull it effortlessly back into small grains of gold. That would not cause many problems for him. Too little heat, and the tsunami of golden dust could have bypassed her scorch release, reaching her. That was not ideal either. Pakura was indeed quite proud of herself and the feat of chakra control she displayed by making sure the veritable mountain of gold would cool off quick enough that Rasa would be hard-pressed to get it combat-ready again. "You know," she turned around, straight in the direction where Rasa was hiding underground. "I trained a lot with the help of my husband to perfect my scorch release. The second I showed him how I use it, he actually berated me for an entire week for wasting so much chakra on maintaining balls of it for offense when I could just as easily use it in quick succession of rapid waves of scorching heat to instantly vaporize my enemies in a surprise attack." A nostalgic smile appeared on Pakura's face. "I won't try to play with you, Rasa." She gently shook her head. For a second, the world stopped for Rasa, and then it happened. An almost invisible wave of heat flooded the area in front of Pakura with such a speed People barely noticed before its effects became apparent. Sand changed to glass. Golden dust transformed into searingly hot pieces of precious metal. The very air shimmered and blurred from the heat, catching fire that extinguished itself, only to again combust in quick succession all over the area where the scorch release hit. Instantly, 1/4 of the arena was changed to a superheated scorching hell that made even the audience far away sweat like pigs, feeling the scalding heat caress their skin. Pakura didn't get much reprieve after her attack. 3 spinning tendrils of golden dust burst forth from the ground, 2 on her sides and 1 behind her, raising their path towards her in an attempt to shred her to pieces now that Rasa knew the person standing there was the real Pakura. In his opinion, no clone could release such a devastating jutsu. Jumping slightly to the side and tilting her body to the left at a precise moment, Pakura barely evaded the first drilling tendril that promptly smashed its tip to the ground on her right side, gouging a good chunk out of it. Turning her body to the right, the second tendril barely missed her, also smashing into the ground near her, blocking her from escaping to the left. Sensing the danger behind her, Pakura instantly threw her body to the ground, causing the last tendril of golden dust to barely miss, passing by above her now duked head, smashing to the ground behind her, blocking her last path of retreat. Pakura's hands impacted the ground as she channeled massive amounts of her chakra into it. Before Rasa could order the tendrils to attack the now cornered Pakura, the ground around her became a peculiar mix of glass with liquid, quickly solidifying gold embedded into it, while the 3 still spinning and twisting tendrils of golden dust connected to the ground slowly started to be smelted, fusing grains of the golden dust together. First, the parts near the ground became liquid and then hardened at a pace visible to the human eye, this as if in chain reaction spreading through the massive tendrils, creating twisted pillars with a spiral-like pattern all over them reaching high up in the air. Before anyone could marvel at the newly created golden masterpiece, Pakura jumped up on top of one of the now solidified tendrils of pure gold, creating small, scorching balls of the size of a small pebble around herself, as her hands locked in a tiger hand seal, while the corners of her lips tugged up into a playful smirk. Scorch release! Scorching rain! Rasa only got a brief bad premonition before Pakura started blanketing the battlefield with her balls of scorching doom in a splashing manner. She didn't target him, but her attack was even worse than if she did. He couldn't safely evade in fear of jumping straight into another scorching ball. He could use Kawarimi, as it was a bit disorienting afterward for a second that could be quite fatal considering Pakura was madly cropping the entire battlefield with her jutsu of mass destruction. As if possessed, Rasa started madly shielding himself with his golden dust, dragging it from the ground and having it intercept the small balls of scorch release, in turn turning into a liquid state that was dastardly hard to control for him. With every ball blocked, he lost control of some of his gold dust, which, unlike sand, wasn't easily replenishable on the battlefield. Rasa had no time to spend converting the liquid gold back into golden dust, as Pakura relentlessly continued her jutsu, making him jump right and left while putting his dust in between his body and the balls. 2 minutes later, the panting Rasa stood in the devastated arena, sweating not much from exertion as from the heat around him, while the sandy ground now sported many blotches of glass or puddles of liquid gold, in some instances even both fused in a peculiar mix. It wasn't just Pakura's jutsu that raised the temperature in the surroundings. The gold in some of the puddles was basically boiling and bubbling, releasing waves of heat into the air. Even the already solidifying parts released a lot of heat, making the air scalding hot. The glass and sand around were almost too hot to stand on. Rasa simply felt as if he was burning alive, his lungs screaming in protest as if the oxygen in them was smoldering him from inside. His skin, tempered under the constantly hot sun of the wind country, actually blistered and reddened. He felt teary-eyed, but his eyes were far too dry for any tears to appear. The underside of his nails were irritating him to no end while his hands shook. His clothes unpleasantly clung to his body due to the heat and sweat weighting him. Rasa now completely understood that Pakura's biggest weapon was not the direct attack, but the torturous discomfort she could cause with her heat. He fought a hard battle against his own wits, keeping his focus on his opponent who, despite the massive chance to strike, seemed content to just watch him suffer. Despite all the agony he was going through, Rasa was far from finished. Noting his chakra reserves are still 80% full, he channeled some of it into his body to calm it down, make the heat more bearable, and prevent further damage, no matter how small. For a minute, Pakura just stared with a raised eyebrow at Rasa as he regained his breath, appreciating and relishing both the direct and indirect damage her technique caused. Still as honorable as ever, I see," Rasa dryly commented with a raspy voice, his face scrunched in both concentration and barely restrained agony, trying to sound mocking. Not that it actually worked, since he looked miserable. Sure, he was capable of channeling his chakra into his body to alleviate the effects of the heat, but he was no scorch user. Pakura could stand in the center of her scorch ball and be completely fine, regarding it as a sunbathing experience. She long ago perfected protecting her body with her chakra against the effects of her own jutsu. By now, there wasn't much heat, flames, or high temperature could do to her. Rasa, despite growing up in the deserts of the wind country, couldn't state the same. At his taunt, Pakura only regarded him with a sweet smile. "I already told you that you suck at taunting, Rasa." She narrowed her eyes with delight. "In fact," she paused, creating suspense. Rasa didn't even manage to blink as blood spurted from his neck, feeling the cold steel only after it long left his neck. His eyes widened in utter shock and bewilderment, uncomprehendingly staring at the stream of his blood dirtying the ground in front of him. He fell to his knees. "Did you really think I only willy-nilly shot my jutsu at you, foolishly hoping you would somehow die?" Pakura asked in a voice laced with amusement. "You are standing exactly where I wanted you. Exactly where I stood at the start of this fight. Me being a ninjutsu specialist doesn't mean I need to end the fight by using ninjutsu, idiot. Knife to the neck is much more efficient." The last thing Rasa saw before dying was Pakura's cold smirk that could freeze even the scorching dunes of the Suna's desert, as his ears registered a small, barely audible pop behind him, followed by a small burst of white smoke.